Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another chapter, chapter 17 of our book club book front desk. I'm Kelly Yang. Let's get into it. Chapter 17. My mom was hopping from one foot to the other in the front office when we got back from the lake. While we were gone, the cable stopped working, and that was a big problem because free cable was a basic requirement of every motel. It was one of those things customers absolutely had to have. You gotta do something! I'm missing Cheers! Fred exclaimed. We picked up the phone and speed dialed Mr. Yao. Luckily, Mr. Yao understood the urgency of the situation. This was not like the washing machine breakdown. People could live with dirty towels for a day or two, but they needed their TV. He immediately dispatched his cable repairman to the motel, a guy named Jose. Jose arrived at the motel half an hour later with a pickup truck full of tools and his daughter in tow. My jaw dropped to the ground when I saw who hopped out of the truck. It was Lupe! Oh my gosh. Lupe stood in the parking lot, squinting at the front office and blocking the sun from her eyes with her hands. I waved to her and started running outside. Her hands flew to her mouth when she saw me. At first, neither of us said a word. We just stood awkwardly at the front desk as my parents cleaned and her dad fixed the cable up on the roof. I kept looking over at her, hoping she'd say something. Finally, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I cleared my throat. I have to tell you something, I said. What? She asked. I don't really have a golden retriever, I admitted. I have to tell you something too, she said nervously. What? I asked. Me neither, she said. I smiled. It turned out, just as I had been making everything up at school, so had Lupe. She didn't have a big house or 3 dogs. And although she did have a trampoline, it was one of those tiny ones, and there was no way you could do a flip on it. I don't know why I said all those things, she said. It just came out. I don't know why I said all those things either, I said. The best part about Lupe and I coming clean was that she knew all about Mr. Yao and how horrible he was. She knew more than I did, in fact. She told me he had 4 motels in Los Angeles, 1 in San Diego, and a couple in Nevada, and 1 on some island in Florida. That's why he's sometimes gone for weeks at a time, she explained. Her dad had been working for him for years, and he was just as rotten to him as he was to us. So you know that Jason's his son? I asked. Of course I know that Jason's his son, Lupe said. Didn't I tell you from day one that he was terrible? I could hardly contain it. My heart swelled with excitement. Finally, I had someone to share all this with. You know what, Lupe? I hope our cable breaks down every day so you can come over. Me too, Lupe grinned. Oh, chapter 18. While Lupe's dad fixed the cable, I filled Lupe in on all the things that had happened, including Mr. Yao changing the deal on us, the drunk man attacking me, and Mr. Yao refusing to buy us a security camera. Oh, you'll never get Mr. Yao to buy that, Lupe said. You're lucky if he pays the electricity. But he has so much money. Have you seen his house? It's enormous, I said. Being rich doesn't mean you're generous. I've gone with my dad to some of the nicest homes in LA. You should see some of these rich people. They have so much money, but they're so mean to us. Just because we're poorer than them, I finished the sentence. Lupe looked at the floor. And because we're brown, she said quietly. I looked down at our 2 arms, mine golden like the desert sand, and hers warm like cinnamon. Well, when we're rich, we're not going to be that way, I said. We're going to have to get off the roller coaster first, Lupe said. I furrowed my eyebrows. Lupe explained, according to her dad, there were 2 roller coasters in America, one for rich people and one for poor people. On the rich roller coaster, people have money, so their kids get to go to great schools. Then they grow up and make a lot of money, so their kids get to go to great schools. And round they go, Lupe said. And poor people? I asked. We're on a different roller coaster. On our roller coaster, our parents don't have money, so we can't go to good schools, and then we can't get good jobs. So then our kids can't go to good schools, they can't get good jobs, and so on and so forth, Lupe said. It was an incredibly depressing thought. The only nice thing about it was that Lupe used the word we. Sucks, she said. It did suck, and she was right too. My parents bobbed along from one bad job to another. Sometimes I even felt like I was on a roller coaster. I had the same queasy feeling in my tummy. But wait, what about Jason? I asked. He goes to the same school as us. For now, she said. But just wait. Come high school, he's going to go to a private school, for sure. That's good, I said. I wished he would go to private school now, somewhere far, far away. Libby shook her head. No, it's not, she said. He'll learn all sorts of stuff that we don't know, and we'll never be as successful. I was curious what Lupe thought of as successful. Everybody seemed to have different criteria. I used to think being successful meant having enough to eat. But now that I was getting free lunch at school, I wondered if I should set my standards higher. When I asked Lupe, she put 2 fingers to her chin and thought real hard. I think being successful in this country means having a living room without a bed in it, she decided. I immediately wanted to run over and cover up my parents' bed in the living room so she wouldn't see it. But Lupe spotted where I was looking and quickly added, It's okay. Actually, you could think of the front office as being sort of like your living room. I nodded. Right, I said. It was really nice of Lupe to say that, but I knew it wasn't the truth. The living room was the living room, and there was clearly a bed in ours, which meant we weren't successful in this country. Not yet, anyway. We had to get off the bad roller coaster and on to the good one. Chapter 19. Lupe and I became inseparable. Whereas before, we were best friends, bound by lies. Now we shared a secret truth. I stopped pretending that I always wore long pants and long sleeves, even on days when it was 102, because I was always cold. The real reason was because sunscreen was too expensive. Or that I was saving my cookie money from lunch for after PE, when I was really saving it for my parents. She stopped pretending she hated sports. Turns out she also had no medical insurance. She and her family were immigrants too. They'd come over from Mexico when she was 3. We told each other everything. Well, not everything. I didn't tell her my dad sometimes let people stay at the motel for free. It wasn't that I thought Lupe would tell on us. I just thought some things were better kept as secrets. Kind of like the security camera we didn't have, even though the sign said we did. One day, while doing my math homework, I had to answer a question about how much money a flower shop made in a month. It was a fairly basic question, and I solved it no problem. But it got me thinking, how much money did the Cala Vista make? I'd never actually calculated before. Curious, I pulled out the ledger from the bottom drawer of the front desk. The ledger was this big black book my dad kept with meticulous records of how many customers we had each day. I ran my fingers over the names of the customers. On any given day at the Cala Vista, we had about 20 customers, including the weeklies. Mr. Yao kept the first 15, as per his revised deal, and my parents got $5 per person for the other 5. But say we got to keep all $20 per customer and didn't have to share with evil Mr. Yao. How much would we make? I lined the numbers up neatly on my paper and started doing the math. My eyes boggled at the numbers. $12,000, that's how much we made from Mr. Yao last month. My parents, on the other hand, only got $750. At that rate, it would take them over a year to make what Mr. Yao made in just 1 month. Mr. Yao wasn't on just any old rich roller coaster. He was on one of those crazy, upside down, hair raising, scream your head off roller coasters. And we were the people operating it for him. Of course, he didn't own the place, and he had to pay for electricity and stuff, but still. The next day at school, I went to the library. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Matthews, the librarian, asked as she looked up from a reference book. "I want to look up the price of buying a motel," I said. Mrs. Matthews raised a sharp eyebrow. "It's for a math project," I quickly added. "I see," she said. She turned back to her computer and started typing. "All right, let's see what we can find." She drummed her fingers on the desk as she waited for the computer to load. "Looks like a motel costs anywhere between $300,000 to $1 million. "Did you say $1 million?" Mrs. Matthews nodded. "Yep," Mrs. Matthews said. "Even more for some of the nicer ones." "Well, that didn't. There's no way we could ever buy a roller coaster." "Oh, look," Mrs. Matthews said, chuckling at the computer. "What is it?" "There's an old couple in Vermont looking to give away their motel. Says here they're holding an essay contest to determine who to give it to," Mrs. Matthews said. "Isn't that sweet?" "Can you, I swallowed hard. My heart was beating so fast. I could hardly get the words out. "Can you print that out for me?" Over and over again, I read the words. A couple in Vermont wanted to give their motel away. They'd been running it for years, and now they were both in their 70s. Instead of selling it, they were holding an essay contest. The deadline was not until after Thanksgiving. There was an entry fee, though, and it wasn't cheap. $300. But look at the essay topic. What would you do if you owned a motel? This was it. This was our ticket onto the good roller coaster. Carefully, I hid the piece of paper inside a library book and smuggled it back to class. I didn't want my classmates to see it. $300 was nothing to them, and a bunch of them were probably great writers. If they saw it, they'd all want to enter, and then I'd be doomed. I clutched the book tightly with both hands and walked back to class, passing Lupe on the way to my seat. I slid into my seat and glanced over at her. She arched her eyebrows. "What's up?" And I shrugged my shoulders. "Nothing much." "All right, kids, listen up," Mrs. Douglas said. "Today we're going to learn about China." A boy behind me raised his hand. "Yes, Stuart?" "Is China in Japan?" Stuart asked. Jason turned around and glared at him. "No, idiot, it's not in Japan." Stuart shriveled in his seat. "Well, where's China then?" he asked. "In China," Jason said. "Oh." Mrs. Douglas told Jason and Stuart both to hush, and she started talking about the imperial era and the Qin Shi Huang. The first emperor of China. She showed us a picture of him. I don't know where Mrs. Douglas got her picture from, but in the picture, Qin Shi Huang's eyes were ridiculously slanted. His eyebrows went all the way up to his forehead. The kids in the front row couldn't stop cracking up. Every time Mrs. Douglas wrote something on the board, they would turn around and make slanted eyes at me and Jason. This prompted Jason to raise his hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Douglas," he said. "I'd just like to clarify. I'm not Chinese. I'm Taiwanese." "Okay," Mrs. Douglas said. Stuart raised his hand again. "Is that in Japan?" he asked. "No, you moron," Jason yelled. "That's not in Japan either." As Mrs. Douglas reprimanded Jason for calling Stuart a moron, I sat very quietly in my seat. I knew I should have felt glad that Jason clarified to everyone that he was not the same as me, but I couldn't help but feel a little sad too, because now when the kids in the front row turned around, they only made slanted eyes at me. And that's the end of chapter 19. See you soon, guys. Bye.